the status quo of our built environments. What very few people know is that the majority of our housing stock is not designed for the lifespan and the ability span. So remember I said earlier that 95% of older adults are aging in place? Well, the overall residential housing stock in our country where everyone lives, studies show that as little as 1% to as much as only 5% of the housing stock has the key features necessary for successful aging in place.
Do you want to be better with money but dread the math? I get it. That's why this show is not focused on math, the markets, meme stocks, or even economic predictions. It is focused on how money fits into your daily life, from having healthy money conversations to caring for an aging parent. I'm Karen Coyne, certified financial planner professional and your host of Money Without Math. Join us for conversations that are practical, sometimes philosophical, and always fresh. Learn more about me at raymondjames.com/clarity, and be sure to subscribe. Aging in place doesn't begin with grab bars or stair lifts. It begins years earlier with decisions about housing, design, caregiving, and risk that most families don't even realize that they're making. In this episode of Money Without Math, environmental gerontologist and longevity strategist Esther Greenhouse reveals the invisible pre-work behind successful aging in place. Drawing from 3 decades of research, design, and lived caregiving experience, Esther has insight into planning that extends to how people actually live, move, and care for one another in their homes. We'll explore how prevention-focused design protects independence, reduces caregiving crises, preserves assets, and creates better outcomes for families long before care is needed. Welcome, Esther.
Thank you for having me, Karen.
Thank you. I saw an article that you wrote recently that shared some really eye-opening stats about aging in place and how misaligned it is with our actual housing stock. And
Yes.
it really was startling. So let's dive in, and let's start with, can you describe for us how you define aging in place?
That's a great place to start. So, aging in place is simply living in your own home, and I would say your home of choice as long as possible. And I've seen in the last 10 years or so an increased emphasis in our society through organizations and businesses discussing the effort to help people age in place. And it's really important that we question that and dive deeper. Now, financial planners that I speak to are regularly telling me that for their clients who are older, the number one concern that they talk about is, I want to remain in my own home and I don't want to be a burden to my family. But what we really have to do is, again, look at, okay, what is aging in place and what does that look like in reality? And what very few people know is that actually about 95% of older adults are aging in place in their own homes. Only about 5% of older adults are living in some kind of specialized housing, whether it's senior apartments, a continuing care retirement community, or a care facility. So most people are aging in place. So why is there this emphasis on it now? Well, there are a few reasons. One is the exponential growth in the older adult population. And then you combine that with major societal and demographic trends of many family members who would have been caregivers normally and right nearby and maybe in the same physical home are not nearby. They might live on the other side of the country or far enough away that makes that informal support so easy. Other issues are we're living longer and we're living longer with more significant health conditions. Women are a particular issue because women tend to live about 12 years with chronic health conditions. Their health conditions may be less serious and spread out over time compared to a man's. And typically they have fewer family caregivers. Often because maybe they had a spouse who was male and he died before they did. So these are all kinds of issues we need to consider with making aging in place a success and a reality. And these are things that are working against people. So it's not enough to say, I want to age in place, but you have to look at, well, how do I make that a success? Who is going to provide care? And I'll just add one more thing to this point, which is um, in the face of all these societal and demographic trends, we also had been facing for several years, and this past year, it's become more significant issue. We're in a paid caregiver crisis. We don't have enough paid caregivers. So if you want to age at home, who is going to provide that care?
Right. It really is a perfect storm. And going back to your earlier stats about the 95% of older adults who are already aging in place versus the
Mhm.
5% that are in specialized housing. So when you were saying that, I was thinking it's maybe by default. They're aging in place by default, necessarily, not necessarily intentionally by design.
That's very true. A lot of times that is the case. I often also see with older adults that they'll do some research and start looking at, okay, what are my options? And they're upset when they say, wow, I'm going to sell my 2,500 square foot house and downsize to the studio apartment, and it's going to cost me the same amount of money. And what they don't recognize is they're not comparing apples to apples. So one of the key things that we talk about, and my firm, Silver to Gold, we're not pushing any particular place for a person to age in place. Choice is critical, right? But we want people to age in place in physical environments that will enable them to thrive. And that's one of the other things that's missing from this understanding of aging in place is that the design of where you live, primarily your home, but also the larger community, actually shape how you age. So we've all heard conversations about people saying, um, my aunt needed to modify her bathroom because she had some mobility issues. And the problem with that focus, while it's accurate, is this critical misconception about the design of the home and specifically home modifications. So, home modifications, from our perspective, are often a band aid solution. They come too late after a person's abilities have been changed, not only by health conditions, but actually by the design of the home in which they live. And I can explain that in more detail. But the other issue is nobody should be undergoing renovations when they are undergoing major health issues or just recovering from them.
Right.
And lastly, few people have the funds or believe that they have the funds to make modifications. So, if I can give you the larger context, all of my work is based on an approach that I developed over 15 years ago called the enabling design method. And the enabling design method has 3 pillars. The first pillar is understanding a crucial concept from environmental psychology called person-environment fit. And simply stated, when there's good fit between a person and their environment, they can function at their highest level of independence. That doesn't mean that they might not need any help or any assistive devices, but they're going to be as independent as they possibly can. The problem comes when you have a gap. And the wider the gap between my abilities and what the environment asks of me, the more I'm pushed to an artificially lower level of functioning by design.
Uh-huh. I kind of like a learned helplessness.
That can be a component of it, 100%.
Uh-huh. Can you
Yes.
give a
And
specific
sometimes we see that.
example?
Yeah, so sometimes in care facilities, we do see that where the environment isn't designed for um, the older adult resident to do for themselves. So then they adopt what's called the sick role, and they do as little as possible for themselves. So, for example, um, it could be simple things like where you store your clothes. You know, the laundry may be done for you in the care facility or even in the private home in which you live, but if you're not capable of folding those clothes and putting them into the drawer or hanging them up, then you're dependent on others. If you, for example, have balance issues and there aren't grab bars, then you're going to be dependent on someone else for toileting, for example. If you're bathing, and this happened with my own mom, she insisted on a shower that when she was building a new house, she insisted on a shower with a curb, just a few inches. That few inch curb can make all the difference. And as her balance issues worsened over time, she couldn't safely get in and out of that shower, even with grab bars. So she became dependent on other people. So I'll share the second pillar of the enabling design method is the status quo of our built environments. What very few people know is that the majority of our housing stock is not designed for the lifespan and the ability span. So remember I said earlier that 95% of older adults are aging in place? Well, the overall residential housing stock in our country where everyone lives, studies show that as little as 1% to as much as only 5% of the housing stock has the key features necessary for successful aging in place.
And that's the one that really caught my eye, that you shared in that article. And, you know, it really wasn't that surprising once I thought about it for a moment. I mean, not like I've been on this, well, I've been on this earth for a handful of decades, but I thought every house that I have lived in, I believe every single one has been multi-story, for example. So just for starters, lots of steps, multi-levels. And I even if it was an apartment or something like that at some point, again, not necessarily an elevator, lots of steps. And that's just for starters. I mean, I know there are many other elements that we'll get to.
There are many other elements, but I invite your listeners to consider that the key things are, can I get in and out of the house independently? Or if I have mobility issues and I use a cane, a rollator, a walker, a wheelchair, can somebody else easily help me get in and out? And then the other thing is, are things set up so I can live as independently as possible on a single floor? So why don't I go over what the Harvard Joint Center for Housing Studies deems are the 5 key features for successful aging in place.
Mhm. Yeah.
So they include a zero-step entry. So that means that there's no steps whatsoever, and the threshold or curb is at most a half an inch, and even a half an inch can be tricky. The next thing is single floor living. So, stairs can be an issue for many people for a variety of reasons. They are having knee replacement surgery. They have balance issues, but multiple stories are not necessarily a problem, and a ranch house is not necessarily a solution. The big thing is that there is one level, and that's the ground level of a private home, or of course you mentioned an apartment. It's an advantage to multi-story living as long as there's an elevator, that you have everything you need on one floor. That you have a kitchen or a kitchenette, you have access to laundry services that you can do yourself, ideally, because again, we want to do as much as possible for ourselves as we can. Um, you need to be able to use the bathroom, toileting and bathing, all those things, and then have a space to sleep, right? So I'm sure you've heard from clients over the decades of, oh, my husband can't do the stairs anymore, so we're converting the dining room to a bedroom. Well, a lot of the homes, that's not even enough to convert the dining room. What about the bathroom? You need to have a bathroom that you can use on that level. So another issue is wide hallways and doorways. Karen, I actually started my career when I was about 5 years old, because at that age, um, my maternal grandmother had been living with us for before I was born. But when I was about 5, her rheumatoid arthritis got to the point where, she needed to use a walker, and because she had to use a walker, she could no longer get in and out of the bathroom independently. And in those days, it wasn't common to widen a doorway. But even once she would have gotten in the door to the bathroom, there were some challenges to toileting independently. So we want to make sure that there are wide enough hallways and doorways that you can move through your home independently. And again, that could be using an assistive device. And sometimes rather than widening a doorway, you can just have someone change the hinges to what are called swing away hinges. That might give you enough breathing room. The two other things, key features, are accessible switches and outlets. This is not just for people who are in wheelchairs, but as we age, our reach range decreases for a variety of reasons. It's just one, our range of motion, for example, decreases. Our balance decreases, so we're not as comfortable reaching as far. And many of us also shrink over time. So we want to make sure that outlets and switches are in what we call the universal reach range, which is from about 18 or 22 inches above the floor to about 44 inches above the floor. And then lastly, lever style handles on doors and faucets. They're shown to help people get out of a space in an emergency much faster. And they're just so much smarter than a round doorknob, or a round knob for faucets, because turning a round knob requires actually your entire hand, arm, and shoulder. Whereas a lever, you can just use a hand, part of your arm, even an elbow, to depress it.
Yes, I have experienced that firsthand. I mean, not because of a specific injury, but there was a door that needed to be replaced in the home. between the mud room and the garage, and we used a lever handle instead of a round one. And I'm so glad, because a lot of times when you're coming into the house, right, you've got how many
Yes.
grocery bags, you're doing that contest of how many bags can I get in one stop. And oh, and I need to pick up this pair of gym shoes that were in the back trunk, and all these things. And just having
Yep.
that lever instead of a round doorknob has been, I mean, within days of using it when we first uh, replaced the old one, I was so thankful that that we did that. Huge, just something so
It's true.
tiny that
It's
has
true.
made such an impact.
It's true. And again, that's right. These are huge things that people don't understand are shaping their lives on a daily basis. And the issue is that as we age, these design features become more and more critical. As we age, that gap that I talked about between our abilities and what the environment demands of us, that grows. So the environment becomes much more crucial. And this is not just happening at the point where somebody is having problems. This is something that's shaping your trajectory of aging for decades before. So the last pillar of the enabling design method is the approach. And that is considering the first two pillars of person, environment, fit, and that the status quo is not designed for the lifespan. We look at things like um, economics and finances. We look at policies and programs through the lens of those first two pillars. And we say, what can we be doing differently so that we're shifting from living in environments that contribute to what I call forced frailty, and instead we're leveraging the features of the environment to enable us to retain as much physical and financial independence as possible.
Yes, and what's so fascinating about this, I mean, there's several things, especially to me working in, the field of personal financial planning, is that this hits on so many different intersections, right? Our financial planning, our longevity and retirement planning, but also our health and well-being, and the physical functional design of the spaces that we live in, the communities that we live in. And that's the area that, like, more and more we are talking about longevity issues. We're talking about health and
Mhm.
well-being, but oftentimes we're not drilling down to these physical elements of space. Not that we're trained to, but again, there is a lot of overlap. And that's right where your work sits, is at the intersection of all these spaces. And what I'm hearing is that with intentional thought and design before there is a crisis, years and years potentially ahead of that, that you have more control than you think you do over the aging
Yes,
and decline process. And I think we had a
yes,
conversation a few weeks ago where you said, uh, right, maybe aging is not inevitable, but decline is decline is not inevitable. Wait, did I get that right?
yes. Yes, yes. So aging, if you're lucky, is inevitable. We're all aging every day from the moment we're born, but the decline is not inevitable. So many people are well aware that there are things they can be doing to improve their longevity and their well-being with age, right? So there's diet and lifestyle, access to good medical care. But very few people understand that the environment in which they live is actually shaping that too.
Now, one thing that didn't come up, or maybe it's in one of these categories as a sub category. I'm When you were thinking about the elements of the successful features. I was thinking about, what about like counter heights and cabinets?
Mhm. Absolutely. So that's an issue within the universal reach range. So we want to make sure that we make it as easy as possible for people to reach things while not creating what we call a prosthetic environment. So typically a prosthesis is something that fills the gap between your abilities and the task you need to perform, like the glasses you're wearing, for example. But what can happen is if we create environments that place too few demands on people, and prop them up, they're not going to participate and be active. But so we want to use things, and these so many of these features we talk about, Karen, actually fall under the category of what's called universal design, meaning that they work for the vast majority of people, regardless of age, regardless of ability or disability, regardless of size. So simple things like in a kitchen to have more drawers instead of just standard cabinets. Um, if you have a cabinet that doesn't have drawers, to have roll-out trays. Bring the items out to you. It's
Mm,
just good design.
yes. And again, maybe a small investment, you might have to pay a little bit more, but if you're doing a kitchen remodel right now, these are some upgrades that can help you age in place successfully.
Absolutely, and they also what's crucial to understand is that the features that really help you age and successfully, just like you spoke about with your experiences with the lever door handle in your own home, these are things that typically make life better for everyone. So they're not age specific. So then when you're thinking about resale, you actually have a house that works for more people, more potential buyers.
Right. Great point. Very true. Who wouldn't want some rollout drawers in the kitchen as opposed to, I just was doing this last night, bending, reaching, trying to find the matching Tupperware lid that so many of us
Yes,
can relate to. Esther, the other thing
exactly.
that kind of connects to when thinking about others is let's talk about caregiving. And
Mhm.
because we so often are relying on a family member, and especially with this crisis that you mentioned of there are not enough paid caregivers, what is the intersection and where does caregiving, how does that influence this design process and your process?
That's a great question. That's a great question. So I'm going to give a personal example, which actually is what led me to bringing my firm to uh, our current focus of working with financial planners and their clients, and also working with the long-term care insurance industry. Because prior to this, I worked in city and regional planning, consulting for regional governments. I consulted for AARP International. I consulted on the design of the nation's first elder-focused emergency department and for senior living. So a varied career, but the focus on financial advisors, their clients, and long-term care insurance came because of applying my enabling design method to my own mother's last 12 to 15 years of life. And so I had told my mother that I would care for her if she needed it. And when she was 80 and already had um, multiple health conditions, she had about 8 chronic health conditions. Um, she finally agreed to have the conversation. And I should back up a minute and tell you that I tried to have the conversation with her decades earlier. My mother was widowed relatively young at 53. My parents were older, and when I graduated college, and my mom was in her early 60s, and I had this unique expertise, I said, let's make some plans for you. You know, your own mother needed to move to a care facility, which you're still upset about. Let's make some plans. And like many people, my mom was really, really uncomfortable about talking about it. So she shut it down and said, I don't have one foot in the grave yet. Um, that was the end of it. Fast forward years later, I kept bringing it up, and finally she had a fall and she had a minor fracture in her non-dominant hand. And that was a wake-up call. And so what happened was we moved her. up to where we were living. In our case, we built a home with her. We helped her design and build it. Um, that's not the only option, but we designed it with the goal of enabling her to retain as much of her physical and financial independence as possible, and to prevent or at least delay her move to a care facility.
And you said she was how old when this process started?
She was 80. She
Mm.
was 80, and she had heart disease. She had not rheumatoid. She had arthritis, sleep apnea, COPD, high blood pressure. Um, I'm forgetting others, but she had a lot of health issues, and she was able to live at home, but she was starting to have some challenges, especially with mobility. And I'm I'm proud to say that we were successful. We were able to delay her move to a care facility by 7 years from the point at which we had brought in additional care. When I needed to start bathing her, when we needed to have aides coming 1, 2, 3 times a week to also help her. So that delay of 7 years living, was because she was living in a home that enabled her to thrive, right? There was that good person environment fit. It also made the provision of care within the home easier by myself and aides, and it gave her what she wanted most. She had dignity, choice, and agency, but at the same time, we estimate that the family and the government saved between $500,000 and $1.5 million in reduced care.
Makes sense. Yeah,
Yes.
that's fantastic.
And for people who are interested in higher um, higher end environments, a higher end assisted living environment is not the national average of $3,500 a month. I mean, even when my mom was in a care facility, she was in assisted living the last 9 or so months of her life. And that was from just a few years ago. We were paying about $8,000 a month for a nice facility, but there are many facilities that are higher end that are $25,000 a month.
Well, we will share a link to your website and those resources. There's a demand, I think, for people who do the work that you do, and there's not many of you. And certainly, the work that you're doing and the way that you're coming at it is very unique and so impactful. So, thank you for the work that you're doing, and thank you for joining
Thank
us
you.
today.
Thank you.
Thanks again for listening. Please follow us on Spotify if you're not already so you don't miss any future episodes. We'd also love for you to rate the show while you're there. Connect with us on social. Search Karen Coyne CFP on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube. If you have feedback or if we can be of service in any way, please let us know. And now for the standard disclosures. Any opinions expressed by Esther Greenhouse are not necessarily those of Raymond James. Raymond James is not affiliated with nor endorses Esther Greenhouse or Silver to Gold Strategic Consulting. This podcast is for informational purposes only.